All right. As we begin to talk about small groups, let me say, first of all, that I am speaking from a place of growth, meaning that in the pandemic, or during the pandemic, rather, our church made, the Mount Sinai Church made the transition to small groups. It's something that I have been wanting to do for maybe 5 to 7 years, but for various reasons, it did not happen. But when the pandemic hit, the pandemic raised a question. And the question that was raised, how can we continue to make the church relevant? And Pastor Dunstan, I was real nervous during the pandemic because I felt that as a pastor, I was losing the grip of the church, meaning not having the fellowship of the people and being able to be around the people. As a pastor is supposed to be connected to the sheep, and there's supposed to be a relationship there. So as a pastor, I felt like I was losing the grips of where God wanted us to go. And God laid it upon my heart to go back to small group ministry. And so I'm speaking tonight to the Northeast Church from a church to church perspective, meaning that we're all trying to remain relevant in kingdom ministry and kingdom building. So we're going to talk about this concept of small groups. And I like to look at it from what I call circling up. Small groups I like to think of it rather as a circle. And the reason why I like to look at it from a circle is because circles are better than rows. In your church sanctuary, you sit normally in a row. Everybody comes in and they take a seat and they sit on a row, and they're all looking in one direction, and that's at the pulpit. Well, in small groups, we get the opportunity to circle up and around and look at one another. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes 4, verses 9 and 10, it says, two are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. For if either of them falls, the one will lift up his companion. But woe to the one who falls when there is not another to lift him up. When we are gathered together in circles, we're able to lean and depend upon one another. And what I want to press upon us tonight is that in a small group setting, you get the opportunity to bond. And I'm going to say tonight a lot about relationships, because I believe that the church ought to be a place where relationships are formed and where people can connect with one another. It really, really, really disturbs me when interpersonal relationships within the church are shattered and broken because of disconnect, disagreements, disharmony. That really bothers me, because we are supposed to be connected, all for each other's spiritual growth. And when we have disconnect, we're not growing spiritually as we should. So small groups is considered to be a system of the church. Now, when I was in seminary at Southeastern Seminary, I left there with two models of church growth. One was a Sunday school model, and the other was a small groups model. Well, at that time, I was a Sunday school man. You could not tell me anything about Sunday school. I totally believed in Sunday school. And that was the way that you should grow the church, was through Sunday school. And that was in 98, 99. I still believe highly in Sunday school. And I still believe that you can do church growth through through Sunday school. But I also realize from a small groups perspective, Sunday school is a type of small groups, and there is a larger understanding of the system of small groups, which is what I want to convey with us this evening. So to understand where small groups fits in the system of the church, there are 8 systems, and I'm not going into all of them. I'm just going to highlight them. The system I want to focus on and make sure that we have a clear understanding is the church, the small group system. But they all help to grow the church. We're all concerned about growing the church. So when you think about growing the church, think about some questions. Do you want the church to experience worship growth? Do you want the church to have guests attending the worship services? Do you want relationships to be fostered within small groups of the church? Do you want to develop a giving environment to do Christian ministry? Do you want to do evangelism and see people come to Christ? Do you want to disciple people and make disciples of Jesus Christ? Do you want to develop leaders to lead the ministries of the church? Well, I would say that the answer to all of those questions would be yes. Well, the questions that we pull out that are highlighted in red help to focus on the small groups ministry. Do we want relationships? Absolutely. Jesus was a relator. He related to people wherever he went. Think about the woman at the well, a Jew and a Samaritan. Jesus broke those barriers and he related to her. Do we want to make disciples? On Reverend Feaster's slide, she had disciples making disciples. That's exactly what we want to happen in the life of the church. And we can do that through small groups. Well, then what are the systems? The systems are evangelism, is how we attract, how we share the gospel. Our worship planning system is where we do the weekend worship services. The assimilation system is how we move guests to disciples. Small groups is where we circle up. Ministry is how we mobilize people. Stewardship is how we develop extravagant givers. Leadership is how we develop leaders at all levels of the church. And strategies is how we seek to improve the church. All of these systems work together to grow the church. Small groups is one of those systems that we can effectively use to grow North, East, and grow Mount Sinai. And one of the things I've told the Lord that is when I get to heaven, I want to be able to say to him, we grew your church. I don't want to get to heaven and Mount Sinai be a church that did not grow. I want growth. And I think through small groups, what we do is develop relationships that help make other relationships. So when you look at this circular diagram here, you see community, crowd, congregation, committed, and core. The concept is that we want to move the person who is out in the community, who is not a part of the church, who's unsaved or de-churched. We want to see them move all the way in to be at the core of the church, which means that they are dedicated to the church ministry. They're committed to a small group. They're committed in a leadership position, and they are serving in the church. The way that we do that is out in the community, we do evangelism. When they come to the crowd, that is where we worship. They participate in the larger worship service. In the congregation is where they develop a relationship through fellowship. That can be in a Sunday school class, a small group. And committed is where persons are really focused on being discipled and they want to make other disciples. And at the core, those persons have taken on a leadership role. And that's the concept of a church, is to move persons from, or assimilate them through where they come from out in the community to become a leader in the church. So remember, the Sunday service rather, is the front door. That's where your doors are open and people come in. But small groups is where that back door is closed. And we've all heard for years that the back door was open and that people enter into the front door of the church and they exit out of the back door. Well, when we have small groups in between the front door and the back door, it gives them an opportunity to enter into one of those groups and again, develop relationships with others. So what then makes for effective small groups? Well, small groups are able to stand alone. They don't have to compete with other church programs, because the small group ministry can offer a variety of opportunities where people can participate in the various programs and ministries. And the small groups meet all of those needs. Now, as we move through the presentation, you'll understand what I mean by that a little further. But keep in mind that when a church transitions to small groups, it can accomplish what it wants through the small group ministry. So, i.e., if you're like me, we're located right across the street from Fayetteville State University, and we can run our college ministry through our small groups, as well as our men's and women's. It's all in how you set up your small group ministry, but you're able to allow people to have various opportunities to enter into a group where they can serve and where they can have fellowship and where they can be discipled. So then what then is the goal of small groups? It is simply to make disciples. And the older we get in this gospel ministry, we learn more and more what Jesus meant in Matthew 28, when he says that you are to make a disciple. I think for years we have thought that if people got saved, they would automatically become disciples. But we've learned that that's just not the case. Making a disciple is an intentional process. So my favorite cake is a red velvet cake. And a lot of people think that they can make a good red velvet cake, but you got to really know how to make a cake in order to make a good red velvet. And you just can't throw anything together. You got to know what you are doing, because I'm a critic of red velvet cake. And I have several people, top three, my wife is one, that can make a red velvet cake. Well, I said that to say that we are in the business of taking people wherever they are and making them a disciple. From the raw person who's off the street from whatever environment they have come out of, to a person that may be already in the church and saved and grew up in the church, we are called to make them a disciple. And so it is an intentional process. Jesus said, "Follow me, and I'll make you fishers of men." Once again, notice what he said, "I will make you fishers of men." Well, those guys, they were already fishermen. Jesus just took them from what they knew how to do, their skill set and their occupation. He says, "I'm going to teach you how to further what you already know." And that's basically what we do in church. We take where people already know and develop it in a spiritual way. So Jesus says, I'm going to make you guys fishers of men. And that's what they did. That's the reason why we sit here tonight, because those disciples whom he called, they became fishers of men, and we are a church today because of them. So what is a disciple? A disciple forgoes his occupation or life practice to surrender to the person, will, and the way of Jesus Christ. So that key word in this definition is surrender. Surrender means abandon the current lifestyle to begin to engage in the ways of Christ. Now, if I had to pinpoint why we do not successfully make disciples, it's because people do not want to give up what they are doing. So, for example, I was in a workshop today, and one of the presenters was talking about talking about the importance of disciple making. And he says, he used a statistic from George Bonner and talked about how many Christians are that are unmarried who engage in premarital sex. And he gave a statistic on that. Well, what people are not willing to do is surrender, abandon that practice, or that activity rather, to adopt the ways of Christ. But the church is called to help people understand and teach them the ways of Christ, that premarital sex does not happen until you become married. Now, to some people, that may be unpopular. We don't want to preach that. We don't want to teach that. But you cannot leave that out if you're going to make a disciple. And that's just an example. When we use that word surrender to the practices, the will, and the way of Jesus Christ. All right, so discipleship, the goals of discipleship. One of the points that was on Reverend Feaster's slides was creating new disciples from existing disciples. Now, I did see a number. It's 49 people. It's 49 of us on this call this evening. If we are already consider ourselves to be a disciple, someone who is surrendered to Christ, someone who has adopted the will and the way of Christ, if we consider ourselves disciples, that means we're already existing as a disciple. We should be making a new disciple. Now, that's where the church ministry is. If Northeast is going to grow, if the Mount Sinai Church is going to grow, we have to accept the responsibility as a growing disciple that I got to make another disciple, which is as an intentional process where we help people understand that they are to bear the fruit of the Spirit and to operate as a person, a saved person who loves the Lord and has accepted the ways of Christ. So the discipleship definition, the process of guiding individual disciples. Notice what that word says. It's a process. It does not happen automatically. No process. Nothing is easy in life. Nothing. Absolutely nothing is easy. Everything is a process of guiding individual disciples to grow spiritual maturity. That's one aspect, growing in that spiritual maturity. But then the next part of the process is the discovering and the utilization of gifts, spiritual gifts, ministry, teaching, administration, hospitality. Those are some of the gifts, and everybody has at least one. Now, I had a deacon one year to say, I have all the gifts. I'll never forget that. Well, nobody has all the gifts, because if one person had all the gifts, the Lord wouldn't need 49 or 48 other people. He needs all of us, and he's given us each a gift to utilize in the ministry. We all have talents. We all have abilities. We should be putting all of that together in a nice bowl of spirituality to make a disciple. Now, when the church does that, we are operating as the church. When we carry out this definition of discipleship. Okay, now, Jesus's method of discipling was one on the masses. I'm not going to go through all of these in the scriptures. One on large crowds, one on 12, one on 3, one on 1, and one on God. Now, the one on 12 is a small group concept. How did Jesus do it? Matthew 16, 13, and 20 is when Jesus was walking with his disciples, and he says, well, who do men say that I am? He took the opportunity when he had his disciples around him and asked them, well, who do people say that I am? They gave their answer. So Jesus says, well, let me ask you another question. Who do you say that I am? Small group. What was that dialogue, that questioning? Well, that questioning was discipleship. He wanted to know what their knowledge was so that he could teach them where their knowledge was not where it should be. He was going to teach them how and what they should know. That's what we do as disciples. Find out what people know. They don't know. We want to teach them. We want to help them understand the scripture. So I say that we should all be engaged in disciple making. It's not up to Reverend Dunstan, pastor. It's not up to Reverend Feaster. Not up to, I heard the deacon's name be called. It's not up to, it's up to everybody. And each of us can be participating in a 1 on 12. And you all may serve as a small group leader, as when we get to talking about what a leader does in a small group system. You may become a leader. But then who are you communicating and talking to 1 on 3? Well, maybe you have adult children. That could be 1 on 3. Maybe you have adult nieces and nephews. That can be 1 on 3. Maybe you have coworkers. That can be a 1 on 3. And then a 1 on 1. But we should all find ourselves making disciples in a 1 on 12, a 1 on 3, and a 1 on 1. Now, that's something to think about. We could spend a lot more time talking about that, but I think Reverend Feaster is going to talk about that a little later. All right, so now that we have talked about the system, why even go through and implementing a small group concept in the church? Well, going back to this circular diagram here, well, it makes the church larger and smaller at the same time, because as you disciple people and move them from the community to the core, what's happening is they are making friends. Jesus said, I lay down my life for my friends. And friends, Christian friends, think about all your Christian friends, people that you can really rely and count on, your friends. We make them in the church. We're a lot closer to our brothers and sisters in the church than we are to some of our biological brothers and sisters. We have a different relationship. There's that blood relationship. It's a Christ blood relationship. It's a sanctified relationship. And some of your biological brothers and sisters, they may not be saved. They may not know Christ, but we are called to make friends and build relationships. So what has become important in this post-COVID season. And I pray to God that we are in the post-COVID coming out of this. We've we found out that there is a need for friendships. If the damage that COVID did to the church is that it evaporated relationships because people were not seeing each other, not in communication with one another, and people became isolated in their own homes. And I'll be honest with you, after a while, I got comfortable not going out. I was like, this is great. I don't have to be bothered with nobody. I don't have to see people. I can get on a Zoom call and be off. I don't have to worry about going in and out. But the Lord said, that's not how this works, bro. Don't get comfortable. You are called to be in relations with people. And you have to be in the community. You got to go where people are. And so there's a need for friendships. So an ideal number for a small group would be 12 to 15 people, because the group becomes an antidote for the social disease of loneliness. And if 5 to 6 people can connect and make friends, then they can go from that group and make another group to go forth and make new further friends. So that's the part where I really enjoyed our small groups. And to give you an example of what I mean is I do a small men's group on Monday morning. Get this, a small men's group on Monday mornings at 6 a.m. At 6 a.m. in the morning. And it's with some men of Mount Sinai, and it's with some men that are not a part of Mount Sinai. Some have a church, some don't. But when we finished one of our first sessions, the brothers said, we need to do another session, meaning from one study to another study. And we did. And as a result, we then set up times to go out and do breakfast. We then set up times where we would go out and we're trying to figure out how can we do mission projects together. But we became friends, and people who were not friends became friends at the sacred hour of 6 a.m. in the morning. When God gave that to me, I didn't know how that was going to work, but it has really worked. So then what is our biblical basis for small group ministry? It's found in Acts chapter 2, verses 42 through 47, where you have discipleship, fellowship, ministry, and missions. I highlighted those 3, but the other 5 purposes of the church are worship and evangelism. But the 3 of discipleship, where that's teaching, sharing, using curriculum. Fellowship is where we're actually sharing experiences. And in small groups, you could share experiences without feeling that somebody is going to look down on you. And then ministry or mission is where a group can get together and do service projects. So that's our biblical basis for small groups, because the early church, they didn't meet in buildings. They met from home to home, house to house. And I remember back in the day when I was growing up, how the missionary groups, they would come to our house. My mama would make chicken salad, have crackers and tea, and they would do missions. And I look back on that now, and I was like, that was a small group. That's what they were doing. So now the definition of small groups from a book called Creating Community is small groups are places of community where people can belong. A small group is community. A small group is a face-to-face gathering of 3 to 12 people on a regular time schedule, during which a sense of accountability to each other and Jesus Christ is present. Notice in that definition, it is a face-to-face gathering. Now, in this era that we're living in, we are doing Zoom. However, the idea is to circle up around and do groups face to face. So another definition of small groups is the place where people can grow spiritually and develop relationships with others. Keyword again is relationships with others. All right, now, I noticed this reoccurring word of relationship. Small groups build relationships. And there are 7 reasons for small groups. One is small groups encourage spiritual growth. That's in Acts 2:42. The goal is to make disciples, connect people. I like Hebrews 10, where small groups nourish relational growth. Let me read that definition of Hebrews 10:24. Listen to this definition. It says, let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds. So when you assemble in a group of others and you're helping promote spiritual growth and you're spending time with others, you are stimulating them in love and to do good deeds. So that's the second reason. But the third reason is small groups build emotional support. Have you all noticed how many people are stressed and dealing with anxiety? There are a lot of people who are anxious and they're stressed out. Well, a small group would be an environment where a person can come in and they have a weakness, come in without fear and find healing. There was a lady that came to our church one time and she was really, really broken. And it's sad to say that we did not have this system in place at the time, but she really needed a group where she could be loved on. And now I would say that if she was that same woman came back, she could now find a group where she could enter into, find relationships, and get that nourishing that she really needed. Small groups stimulate service. We talked about utilizing the gifts. Groups help incorporate new members or newcomers. So our small group session started on March the 7th. And so I was peeking in on some of the groups on last week. Last week is when they started. And I looked into the group and I saw a new member. I said, yes, she is getting connected. She's getting connected. She is where she needs to be. And I was so happy about that because that's what we want. We want people to be able to enter into fellowship. It also gives you opportunity to develop leaders, where leaders carry out the shepherding role, and it helps us to do the Great Commission, making disciples. So I want to pause right here and ask a question. How would small groups benefit your church? Can I get 1 or 2 persons who would take a stab and answer that question? How would small groups benefit Northeast? You might be on mute, but take yourself off mute. And I can't see you, so I can't see who to call on.
I would think that small groups would spiritually grow the church. Because as you were speaking, you said back in the day, I remember those small groups.
Right.
And those small groups grew into big church, large churches.
Exactly.
So I think small groups would grow the church.
Exactly, exactly. Mount Sinai grew from a Sunday school, which was a small group.
Mhm.
Absolutely. All right, thank you. I'm not sure who that was, but thank you for answering that question.
That was Janora Williams from Northeast Baptist Church.
All right, Ms. Williams, thank you so much. All right. Let's continue in talking about this relational environment, because I want the church to be a place where people can genuinely connect. And as I stated earlier, as a pastor, my feathers get really ruffled when, particularly, and I always tell our young adults, if any of those seniors are bothering you all, come see me. I let them know, because I want to make sure that they are part of a relational environment. And so we have to help everybody understand it's not our church. And people think that it's their church. It's the Lord's church. We just happen to be servants of the Lord, where we are just utilizing our gifts to carry out in ministry. All right, so it's a relational environment, but in the relational environment is where discipleship takes place and real teaching takes place. So the word of God is taught in a small group. It gives the opportunity for the word of God to be explained. And then it also, it creates an opportunity for persons to utilize the gift of shepherding. And shepherding, as we're going to see in a few minutes, is an extension of the pastor. And sheep must be protected and cared for. In a small group, that can happen. In a small group, in a relational environment, there should be transparency, meaning there should be freedom to talk about what's going on in a person's life, what somebody is experiencing and what they may be going through, and talk about that in a small group. Then there's accountability. If somebody's not in the group on a particular day, the leader and others are saying, hey, where are you? What happened? What's going on? Just checking in on you. There's a sense of accountability. Did you do your assignment from last week? Are you practicing the application from what we studied in the previous session? There's accountability. And then lastly, there's a guided practice. Now, I'm not taking time to go through all of the scriptures, that would take a little bit more time. But a guided practice is great disciple makers will always take their followers through a process. And that can happen through small group ministry. So I want to ask you another question. Evaluate the health of the relational environment in the church or a particular small group. So I don't want you to answer. I just want you to think about this. Are the people friendly? And I remember one year I had several people to come in from the outside and sit in. And I wanted to know, were the people of Mount Sinai friendly? And some said yes, some said no. But in a small group setting, people should be friendly. Are people open and honest with each other? Do they care beyond the group meeting? Meaning that once the meeting is over or the session is over, do people follow up with each other? Do they notice when somebody is not there? All right. Those are important questions. And are there other relational indicators that something is going on in other people's lives? Do we take notice of that? And if we're not doing this, if we're not answering these questions in a positive manner, then the church needs to evaluate itself on connectivity and love. Jesus said, love ye one another. And then he said, do it as I have loved you. So sometimes people get upset. And I say, listen, the Lord loves you in your stuff just like he loves another person in their stuff. Jesus loved us. And so that's what creates a relational environment. So then what are the types of small groups? There's several types of small groups. Um, there are actually 8, but I'm going to focus on 4. Discipleship groups, Bible study groups, where the Bible is taught and the word of God is explained and how it can be applied. There is homework assignments. Those are discussed. Discipleship groups. And we really want everybody to be in a discipleship group. Then there could be prayer groups, where groups get together and pray specific types of prayers. Then there are fellowship groups, social interaction, where people get together, various age levels across age levels, and they fellowship together. There's an emotional support. So just to give you an example of that group while I'm talking about it, is we have a walking group that meets at the track on Monday mornings at 8 a.m. It's a walking group, and it's a group that has been, they walk consistently, they walk at their own pace. They get together, they all arrive at 8, and what they do is they assemble, they pray together, they invite anybody who's on the track. If they want to join in prayer, they can join in the circle and pray, and then everybody goes and walks at their own pace. So I was at another session, and a friend of mine says, Johnson, I saw your members at the track the other week, and they all had on Mount Sinai shirts. They were just taking up the whole track. And I said, yep, that's one of our groups. That's what our fellowship groups. And that's what it's all about. It's about, for that type of group, it's about that interaction. And then there are task and mission groups where people do projects together. All right, so move to the next section of our discussion is, how then do we recruit leaders to lead a small group? I said a few minutes ago that the small group leaders are an extension of the pastor, meaning that they share in that shepherding role. So whomever is recruited to be a small group leader, it is a precious responsibility to shepherd those who are in the group. As the pastor shepherds, you get the opportunity to care for the souls of the people. And leaders need to understand that they're helping develop community within the church. It's not their group, it belongs to the church. They're helping to promote love and foster relationships with inside of the church. Qualifications for a group leader, because some of you may end up being a group leader. Number 1, definitely got to have a personal relationship with Christ. 2, a small group leader should be committed to studying the word, having a personal devotion time. They should want to see people grow and flourish. If somebody does not want to see people grow, then they shouldn't serve as a group leader. And then they should have the time and heart for people and discernment to lead a group. No, you don't have to have a degree to be a group leader. You just need to really have a good relationship with the Lord and love people. All right, so there's certain gifts that go along with the shepherding, with the small group leader role. 1 is shepherding, 1 is serving helps, and I just included Jesus's passion to love people. So I was going to ask you to answer these, but we may not have enough time. But think about the gift of shepherding. The spiritual gift of shepherding asks a question, and you answer these 1 to 5, 1 being the least, 5 being the highest. I have a God-given ability to help others grow in their faith. I'm willing to take the initiative in helping other Christians grow in their faith. I have trained Christians to be more obedient disciples of Christ. I am able to give spiritual discernment to others. I have sensed the need to help other people to be more effective in their ministries. So let's say you scored 4 and 5s on those, which means that you may have a total score of about 20 to 25. That means you would have the gift of shepherding. That's my marker. I use that as my mark of 20 on a score of 1 to 25. 20, you have that gift of whatever it may be, in this case, shepherding. Service helps. I take action to meet physical and practical needs. It makes me happy to do things for people in need. I'm sensitive to the needs of people. I have an acute awareness of physical needs of others. I enjoy doing little things that help people. A good leader should have that gift of service and helps. Again, they score like a 20. That means you have the gift. Possibly make a good leader with training. You make a good leader with training. Okay, so that's how you look at how you choose a leader, or how do you choose curriculums for small groups? Well, depending on the type of groups that you have, the pastor, the small group leader, whoever that person may be, or Christian education person, they work together and help develop the types of curriculums that are going to be appropriate for groups. And all of the curriculums must be verified and checked off by the pastor and the small group leaders. So in your discipleship groups, the curriculum's there. In your fellowship groups, whatever the curriculums may be, in your prayer groups, if there are prayer journal books or what have you, then all of those must be checked off by the pastor and approved. If somebody submits, hey, I think this is a good book, then that must be approved. Group leaders just don't get an opportunity to pick any book or curriculum they want. That has to fall up under the ministry. So to give you an example of our 2022 discipleship and fellowship groups at Mount Sinai, the 21-day fast is a financial type of book, spiritual fasting type of book, something we've done before at Mount Sinai. And it really kicked off our financial awareness when we did it several years ago. And we thought that it should be done again. The Mind of Christ is an excellent study. Actually, that's going to be a two-part. It's going to be broken up this spring. And then it's going to pick up in either the summer or the fall. Walking in the Spirit is another group, and The Kingdom Man by Tony Evans. Those are our discipleship groups. In the fellowship groups, we're using a book on health and nutrition that's dealing with health and nutrition, the 7 pillars of health. And many of you already may have that 1619 project. One of the members wanted to do that. It was like, hey, that would be a great idea to look at our history. So those are the curriculums that we're using in the discipleship group and fellowship group. Now that went through a time of narrowing down. We started planning for spring small groups last November. Last November, we started planning for our spring group so that in January, we could identify who would be small group leaders so that they could get the curriculums, begin to study, and have it through January and February and be ready to kick off in March. So how do you promote and advertise groups? So what I have gathered from other churches that are doing small groups well, they list all of the groups that are going to be offered in a particular season, and they promote it. They promote it on their websites, promote it in a small group pamphlet. One of the churches here in Fayetteville's Covenant Love, when I first started looking at small groups, they just had a small group pamphlet that they handed out to everybody that had all of their groups. People could study that and then sign up for their small groups. So just to give you an example, back in the pandemic, when it first started in 2020, these were the groups that we did: Pursuing Holiness, those were discipleship groups, A Place Called Heaven, and Jesus Among Secular Gods. In the fellowship groups, there was a finance group. There was a baking group. My wife actually did that class. I mean, not class, it's a group. She did that group, and people are still talking about that. The men and the women had groups, and then the prayer groups have been continual groups of schools and health, praying for schools and health. So that was our very first offerings of small groups. Now, groups should be accessible for people to sign up. Make it easy for people to get into a group. One way is Sunday signups. You promote it during your Sunday morning worship. You have a table out front where people can sign up. They can go online on your website and sign up. You just have a church-wide promotion. If you do a monthly literature that goes out to the congregation, you put it in there. You make it really easy for people to sign up. And you make it easy to get out of a group by providing an exit date. So you have a start date and an end date. And one of the things that you may run into is groups may say, we need more time. Can we add on? Well, I would say you build in an extra week into your calendar, but when it's time for groups to end, all groups end. They may pick back up, but they'll start again, but they must end. So for example, spring sign up. Sign up month is February. Persons begin signing up on Sunday, February the 8th. We do small group leaders training on February the 12th. Small groups begin on March the 8th. This was in 2021. And then we did a wrap up to find out what would be offered what leaders thought could be offered in the next go round, and then all groups in. So that's sort of a template of what needs to happen to promote small groups. And then what platforms would we use? Well, in this time, we are using the online platforms, Zoom, primarily Zoom. We did start out using a couple of Google Hangouts, Microsoft Teams, Facebook can all be used as platforms. When this COVID thing breaks up, there'll be more face-to-face groups because that's really how small groups should be designed. And then real quickly, how do you implement a small group? So let me just sum up what I have stated. You identify a small group leader, i.e. the pastor, the Christian education director, or leader of small groups. There'll be a person that works in conjunction with the pastor that will be the leader of small group. Survey needs of the congregation. That can be done to determine group offerings. It's good to do a survey to find out what people think, what they feel, what their spiritual needs are, what kind of relational things are they experiencing, and then select the necessary curriculums and materials for the groups. You can use a spiritual gift inventory to evaluate who would be a group leader who has the gift of leadership and administration. That could be a list to initially draw from, and allow persons to volunteer to be small group leaders. And they go through a training, one or two, preferably 2 sessions where they're trained on being a group leader, and then supply leaders with the curriculums that they will facilitate. And again, set that date to train small group leaders, set a date for small group sign up, and try to offer a month a month span where people can sign up for small groups. Set the dates where groups will start and when groups will end. Do all that you can do to advertise groups within the church, through literature, through your social media, on your websites. People sign up, the groups begin, and then once groups end, the small group team assembles back together and does an evaluation at the end of the session. And then you can also give the group an opportunity to do a Google form, and they can do an evaluation and a survey and get some data back on what people thought about small groups and what other possible curriculums and ideas that people have is good content for, or good data rather, to have when you're evaluating for the next session. All right, Pastor Dunston, that brings us to a conclusion of